Welcome to week 4. This week, our major uh, emphasis is on talking about performance management and appraisal, um, which is an interesting. It's an interesting topic in Montessori. We spend so much time really trying to devalue assessment and evaluation to a certain degree, um, while also depending on it really significantly. What I mean by that is, I think I've talked about this in previous discussions for this particular course, in fact, is that as Montessorians, we look at things like tests and cumulative exams and high stakes testing is something that we ought to not do. And it's one of the areas, actually one of the weaknesses, I believe, of Montessori is that so much of what we do and so much of what the decisions we make are perceived to be anecdotal or subjective because we have this reluctance to use assessment with children. And so that's for another conversation, but something very important that I think Montessori needs to improve upon, because we need to be able to have qualitative and quantitative ways of evaluating children's progress. And this does not just mean academic, or certainly it's not just limited to academic, but we need to be able to measure and make sure they're making progress. That's the bottom line with children. The same can be said for our teachers. So when we're talking about evaluation and feedback, I think it's also important. I don't want to suggest that we need to be applying grades to teachers and looking at standardized tests and making staffing decisions based on the data that we collect. But more importantly, we want to be regularly giving feedback, because we should be in the habit in all areas of school management of continuous improvement. So I'm going to say that again. In all areas of our school, we should always be geared towards continuous improvement. What does that mean? That means that with our instruction, with our management, with our systems, with our safety protocols, with our alumni outreach, we always ought to be trying to look at what we're doing and trying to figure out how to do things better. That's really important for a couple reasons. One, the world changes, people change, and so if we do not continuously evaluate our practices, we will essentially and eventually become outdated, and other people will be doing it better, and we will not be delivering product or delivering an experience that is as good as it can be. We do not want to become complacent. Complacency is one of the things I see in teachers and schools that, it creeps up. A good example is, you've had somebody who's been in a school, whether it's a teacher or an administrator, and they've been occupying the same role for 20 years or 30 years, and they've been doing the same thing. And what worked 20 years ago really well is what you stuck with, and you're unwilling to change it because it's worked well and because it's what you're comfortable with. And so then what happens is, while the world changes or people change, you become sort of, I don't want to call it obsolete, but you sort of become outdated. So we always need to be working towards that continuous improvement. Part of the way we do that with our staff is by giving feedback. And I'm trying to, again, what word do they use here? They use performance management and appraisal. So I'm not sure if I would necessarily call it performance management and appraisal, but you need to figure out what works in your own system. But at the very least, you want to be giving regular feedback to your teachers. One of the methods that I've used over the years is first of all, when I'm running a school, I like to make it through every class and see every face every day. Obviously, if my school is 5,000 people in a huge public school, and if you're you may not be able to do that, but for most Montessori schools, they're not so huge. So what does that mean? That means if I'm greeting in the morning, then once I've sort of gotten everybody settled, then I like to take a minute, catch my breath, then I just walk through the class. And I don't say anything necessarily. If somebody says hello, of course, I'm not going to shun them, but I'm not trying to interrupt. But I'm just trying to walk through and get a gauge of how things are. It's really incredible how much information you can gather during that walkthrough. And I would suggest doing this as often as you can, even if you're not necessarily looking for something, but just sort of experiencing what the class is like. So that's one way you can gather information. The other thing that it does is it gives you face time with the teachers and the children. One of the things that I see happen with many administrators is they're armchair theorists. They do not know their children. They don't know their classes. They don't know faces. So when something happens, they don't have a relationship with children because they are somebody that just sits in an office and is scary. So, do your walkthrough, get a gauge of what's going on in the class. And then in terms of performance evaluation and just evaluation period, at the beginning of every school year, I like to have a conversation with all my staff members. I want to, and I can share some forms with you all. Maybe that would be a good idea for this course. I want to talk about what their goals are for the year, and so that could be things that are academic and managed and measurable, but also what do they want to improve on? I want to go into the school year with some, even if they're loose goals, some things they want to try to do better. For example, I want to get better at assigning specific follow-up work. I want to put together a better system of giving consistent feedback to my students, or I want to work on giving a better lesson. What does that mean? Is it in as many cases as you can, try to find something quantifiable because that's helpful. But really, what you're trying to do is you're really trying to give the teacher the opportunity to share what they think they want to do, and if nothing else, this is providing them the opportunity to look at their own practice. So that's one thing I like to do in the beginning of the year. Then, towards the middle and end of the year, I provide them a document that is an evaluation document that looks at various different things. It includes their personal relationships with children, things like punctuality, professionalism, all sorts of things. And it's the same document that I'm going to ask them to evaluate, and then I'm going to evaluate it as well. So essentially, I'm going to be doing the same evaluation of them as they're doing of themselves. And then following that, we get together for a meeting and we look at that evaluation. The reason why I like that model is because it's not that we're necessarily trying to say you're doing great or you're not, but are we on the same page with what they need to work on? I would rather a teacher, if it's a 1 out of 4 scale, 4 being exemplary and 2 being needs work, I would rather a teacher give themselves a 2, even if I'm giving them a 3, but certainly if I'm giving them a 2, rather than a 4. I want to know as a school administrator that the issues or the challenges that they think they need to work on are the same ones that I think they need to work on. Because then going from that point, then we can have a conversation of trying to figure out how are we going to go about making these changes? What strategic decisions or what can we do to try to take that particular area and work on it? And so that's what I can provide. So again, those are 2 sort of formal evaluations that we can do over the course of a year. And that second evaluation, if we do it in, obviously this is a different year in terms of, being closed, but if we can have that conversation early spring, late winter, that is a really nice way to lead into contract conversations for the next year or just planning for the next year. So if you have somebody that has a real need and you want to talk about what they're going to have to do to work on, it could be that those are the things that they need to change in order to keep a job, or, hey, for next year, here are the things I want to work on. But, and those are really practical examples of evaluation that I think bear serious fruit. The other part of feedback and evaluation is teachers, at least in my experience, want to know what they can do better. There are, of course, many people that are defensive about things, including me. If somebody says, you're a horrible school administrator, of course I'm going to be defensive immediately. But what I hope I'm able to do is that if people can give me feedback of how I can get better to improve my practice, even if I'm possibly ashamed or upset about something I haven't done well, that it'll give me the opportunity for growth. And I think ultimately that's what we're looking at. If we can help our teachers, our staff, ourselves as administrators, if we can all continue to grow and evolve our practice, theoretically, the product that we're going to be able to produce, in this case as a school administrator, the product is supporting your teachers through improvement, who are then going to be able to deliver a better product or educational experience to their students, then ultimately we're going in the right direction. And that's what we ought to be doing. Again, thinking back to that continuous improvement. So it is very important. And many of us are limited by what sort of evaluations we can do because of our school. So it may be that we have to give this sort of evaluation for some reason. Or it may be that your job description, or maybe you're not even an administrator, and so you're not going to be evaluating. But what I would suggest in whatever practice you're doing or in whatever field you're doing, even if it's not education, is figuring out what model of feedback works for you. And keeping in mind that your goal is not necessarily to be punitive or make people feel bad, but to try to help them in service of continuous improvement. So figure out what model works for you, what you're allowed to do. And then the other thing that I'm also going to share, because I want you to be aware, is time. One of the hardest things to do as a Montessori administrator is do all the things that you know you ought to do. So I'm going to say that again. One of the biggest challenges is dealing with the reality that you're not going to be able to do all the things you know you should be doing. So in my case, there's so many things I know I should do and I want to do, but when you plan a day, and then all of a sudden you have somebody that walks in your office and says, hey, do you have a minute? Which we know means do you have an hour? And then you get a call because a kid's, having a rough day and your teacher needs support. By the time you've finished your day, you haven't accomplished anything you've wanted. And many days go like that as an administrator. You're putting out fires and you're triaging what you need to do in that immediate moment. And so often things like, formal evaluations or meetings, those things, get pushed back. So what you have to do is, again, give yourself permission or understand that you're not going to be able to get everything done, but figure out how you're going to fit those things in that are really important. And so in my opinion, there is no magic wand of how to fit everything in other than learning as an administrator or as a leader in any business of learning what you have to do and what is the most valuable use of your time. And that's going to change. That's going to differ for each of you depending on your situation. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope that's a nice sort of, just if nothing else, a philosophical discussion on evaluation and feedback. And again, find your style.